please.
Director Craven?
Here.
Director Bennett?
Here.
Chair Mulhart?
Here.
Director Kelly?
Here.
Director Borchard?
Here. Sam McIntyre is in the audience as an alternate, and Dan Nauman is on his way after he may be able to come late after dealing with some issues with his mom. So, agenda. Any changes on the agenda?
One small change. It's on page 5 of your board letter.
Okay.
It's in the second full paragraph.
Oh, that'd be the...
Okay.
You should have received a handout,
Okay.
but it changes the number 568,763 to the number 288,763, and the number 40% to the number 20%.
Can you give us the numbers again? It's a little bit fast for
Oh,
me.
sorry. Sure. The last line, second full paragraph. You'll see a number.
Up here, okay. We had a shift over of my glasses so the chairman could see, so you're going to have to just be patient with me. Okay.
Jeff offered me his glasses, and they're more powerful than your glasses, and I actually can use these. Maybe I need to change my glasses. So, anyway.
Okay.
What number? I'll try these. Here, pass these. Pass these back. Excuse us while we'll do some.
After
Whoa,
glasses.
Steve, what are you doing?
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. These are fine. Thank you.
Okay, now can you give us the numbers again, please?
Okay, the last line of the second full paragraph, the number 568,763 should read instead 288,763, and the number 40% should read instead 20%.
Okay. Okay, those items are done. Any others, changes to the agenda? Nope. All right. Public comments. Anybody have any non-agenda GMA issues? If there are agenda items, we'll deal with it at the appropriate time. Sam?
Yes, Sam McIntyre, Brillwood Water. I was wondering if the board would have time today to consider the mix-up or the confusion that revolved around the inappropriate letter that was mailed out by staff to the pumpers regarding fines and whatnot.
I think because it's not on the agenda, the technical answer is no, but let me use a moment to say to staff at the next scheduled board meeting, you need to give us a report on this issue and the ones that you've cleared up and the ones that are still pending, and just give us a report on it so we can deal with it at that time. Sure. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, that's not a continuing item.
It may be a continuing item, but it's not on this agenda, so we can't deal with it today. I mean, I can take, Marty, if you want to speak to it, but I can't do anything about it because it's not on this agenda, but you can talk to the board.
You know, I feel a little bit like one of those angry mob members at a, at a town hall, but I promise you we're not talking about health care today. I'm Martin Gramco with Southland Sod Farms, and, Lynn, Steve, we know each other. I don't know these other board members. It has been a while since I've come to a meeting. Jurgen and I have been directly and indirectly involved with Ordinance 5 and the GMA since its inception. And I feel like this most recent issue with these letters, I got 4 or 5 efficiency letters back in August, which I had sent off in January, and was very quick, looking at them immediately when they come back. That stuff doesn't sit in my inbox for very long. That surprised me. So what did I do wrong? So I looked at it and I realized, what? I didn't send my maps in this year, and I thought, well, it's the same old report. I send it in every year. Sheila and David are great. If there's going to be an issue, I'll get a call, and Sheila will say, hey, Marty, send me your maps. So I get no call, but I did get a call from David saying, oh, by the way, you gotta make sure you fix this application and do send your maps. And by the way, there's a letter coming that's going to tell you. I just want to warn you because it's going to be a tough one, and it's going to tell you you've got these penalties. Thank you, David. And I got to tell you, David and Sheila have been working with the agricultural community since the beginning, and I'm not a real big fan of county bureaucracy, but the one bureaucracy I always point to as being a real good group is this GMA group, and it's because of David and Sheila. And all right, so fine, no problem. I'll get the letter. In the meantime, let me get my fixes back. So I send the maps in, and I sign my name and date it, but I didn't write my name in, so I'll write my name. All these little really technical issues that this is just silly. But so a couple of weeks later, I get the letters, and I don't know, you guys sitting down, but my penalties were over $1 million if I didn't complete this application. And oh, by the way, next time we're going to give you this, period this time, but next time it's got to be right. Well, that's just a complete change in the relationship that this agency has had with its pumpers. And I think it was very disrespectful of the pumpers, of the farmers. And I'd like you just to know that. I suspect that wasn't the intention, but that was certainly how it came across. And I certainly hope that we can get back to the kind of relationship that we've had in the past with staff. For example, you used to be able to walk back and talk to David. I'll come over here for whatever my issues are, and I very often will just stop in with David and Sheila. Is there anything I need to know? Is there, can I help you with anything, or what's going on in the GMA? Now I have to check in at the front desk, and I can't. It's like the personal relationship that was there is now changed, and if that's the way it's going to be, I guess that's the way it's going to be. But I don't think that's good for an ordinance that's based on self-reporting and and honesty. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Marty. Okay. Anybody else have non-agenda items? Again, on this issue, we need to put it on the next agenda to give us a briefing on how we solve the problem, and we're all aware of the problem. I think most of the board members, and I've heard from a variety of constituents that our message got blown out the wrong way, and we got to solve that problem. But we got to do it in the right sequence, and today's agenda doesn't allow for it. So we'll put it on the next month, September's meeting. Thanks, Marty. Thanks. Let's see. Board member comments. Anybody else have any, or anybody have any board member comments? Okay. All right. Let's deal with item number 1. Jeff.
Goes. Cool. Good morning, Chair Mulhart, board members. For the record, my name is Jeff Pratt. I'm the executive officer for the GMA, and I'm here to present the work plan budget for fiscal year 09 and 10. I'm accompanied by several staff members who I won't introduce at this time, but if they're required to answer a question, they'll come up and introduce themselves. Purpose of this meeting, of course, is because of what happened during your regularly scheduled July meeting, in which a placeholder budget was adopted. Your board directed staff to schedule a special meeting of your board for consideration and adoption of a final budget for this fiscal year. Of course, the purpose of today's presentation is to review with your board the July staff recommended budget, the adopted placeholder budget, take direction from your board on budget amendments for adoption into the final budget. The way I'm going to do that is very briefly, but I'm hoping that this is going to be filled with information you can use in your deliberations. I'm going to review the history of Public Works Agency charges, those things we refer to as PWAC. I'll review the development of our first ever comprehensive FCGMA work plan, which distinguishes the day-to-day core services from the surge and effort that's been contemplated and referred to as the additional services. I'll remind you of your previous direction to us on pursuit of this work, and I'll quickly review the important highlights of the recommended and the placeholder budgets, and then we'll take direction from you on how you would like to change it.
Jeff, let me interrupt for a second. Miranda, can you show the record or reflect that Neil is now here as an alternate?
Okay, this slide shows you Public Works Agency charges beginning of the year 0001. It's as far back as we could go electronically. It shows it in hours, it shows it in FTEs, full-time equivalents, and it shows it in dollars. Also included, the last line is, of course, what was recommended. Oh, there it is. In the July budget that was presented to your board. Some things you probably want to note is that prior to the 05-06 season, if you will, staffing of the GMA was largely confined to about 3 people. A fourth might have been called in occasionally to share in some of the responsibilities. Subsequent to that, I came here January of 05, and then we had some staff changes later in the year, winter of 05. We started spreading the work around county staff, calling in different expertise where it was needed. Another important point is that the average FTE number over the last 9 numbers, if you group those, is about 2.1, even though 2 of the 9 years of the staffing, it dropped below 2 due to illnesses of those 3 staff members. Subsequent to January of 2005, staffing FTE levels have averaged somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.2. This year, staff has recommended 2.86, and that does not include the 0.5 in Brian Bondi, who's not a county employee, but a United Water Conservation District employee, shared with the GMA. We put a lot of time and effort into the development of the work plan. I'm not going to read this slide to you. These are just highlights. The next 2 slides just highlight some of the meetings on which we discussed all or part of what should be on a work plan, what should constitute core services, what should constitute additional services. It's also worth mentioning that we had discussions related to all the extra work prior to any of the dates listed on these slides. Most important among these discussions were discussions that occurred after we started mining the database. We uncovered and presented to your board several interesting problems ranging from unregistered and non-reporting wells to boundary issues. All of which resulted in additional services discussion. Here's the second slide, more meetings. Some of the more interesting facts to emerge from the data mining was the inefficiencies and limitations of the database used to track water usage, allocations, credits, owners, operators, etc. We amassed for the first time an aggregate of the credits that had been issued by this agency. As I recall, they were in excess of 500,000. We tied GIS to the database to estimate the irrigated acreage, which is estimated currently at about 55,000 acres within the GMA. All of this was the kind of data that your board needed in order to make informed public policy decisions. The core services your board and we identified for us, and we identified for your board, and your board approved, I've lumped into 4 easy to read categories. And I did this for simplicity's sake because I've heard some complaints about the budget sheet being a little complicated and difficult to read. There's administration. Among administration activities are the meetings, contracts, budget reports, etc. There's records, where a great majority of our time is spent collecting data, doing some sort of analysis on it, limited QA/QC, a lot of handwork, a lot of manual handling of that. There's technical issues involved with SQL review, investigation of certain problems, some more of the advanced enforcement, and then studies and meetings associated with that studies, like Las Posas Users Group, the new Oxnard Plain Users Group, and the Groundwater Management Plan. Recall that the average effort on this group of tasks over the last 9 years has been 2.1 FTEs. Since assuming the position of XO of the GMA, we've averaged about 2.2, as I said before. We have a low of 1.3 and a high of 2.5 over the history of from 2000 and on. During July, we asked for about 2.3 in the category of core services. If you look at those 4 categories, how the time is spent by staff, you see immediately that there are 2 major areas of effort: administration and the record keeping. It's not easy. I mean, it's not difficult to see that if you want to attack efficiencies, you start the bigger slices of pie, which is what we've recommended to your board in the past. We're trying to improve accuracy, levels of service, and efficiencies. These were additional services identified in the work plans over the past almost 2 years that your board was interested in our pursuit of. They represent, in our proposal this year, about 1.2 FTEs. That is our best estimate. Your previous board direction to us in the realm of core services and additional services is to work on the core, and we tried to prioritize the additional services. You may recall, it was decided that that was maybe too early, that we should pursue them as the opportunities arose, pursue discussions with the SAG, and work on them as we deemed necessary until we were able to prioritize them more fittingly. Last year, you approved PUAC charges in the range of $600,000, which represented about 3.1 FTEs. And that did not include the United share position of half an FTE. So the total authorized FTEs last year's budget was 3.6. Our actual effort fell short of that for a variety of reasons, and I put that down at the bottom. Whoops, excuse me, back up. Where you see in front of it, well, it's the second line up. We actually hit about 2.6. There are explanations, good explanations for this. We hadn't finished spreading the work out around the agency, and several of us got hit. Gerard got pulled off to levy certification. Gerhardt got pulled off to finish the MPDES negotiations, which were very important for the county. I quit charging as a result of becoming the Public Works Director, and my charges being reflected in the overhead costs of everyone else. Brian didn't get here until halfway through the year, so we got about a quarter of his time, and Miranda didn't get here until about 3/4 of the way through the year, so we got about a quarter of her time. In this year's budget, we recommended 3.5 FTEs, and I'll more on that in a minute.
And you think it's likely we'll be much closer to that in terms of actual?
This year? Yes, I do.
Because we've already hired, we've got the people on.
I do, and we've spread some more work out. We've got some work spread out over 9 plus 10 people maybe, county GIS, IT services, etc. In the recommended budget that we presented to your board on July the 22nd, we had available funding at the beginning of the year about $2.4 million. Our service and supplies proposal was $222,000. $182,000 of that approximately was for county council, Brian Bondi, and a couple of contracts that we have, evapotranspiration and the $25,000 that your board said we should use to stimulate the Pleasant Valley Users Group, which is now the Oxnard Plain Users Group. The PUAC charges contemplated 2.9, the effort of about 2.9 FTEs at 565,000. And in the contingency, we had proposed 215,000. 100,000, which your board had previously told us to keep, and 115 to use as we developed a plan to modify or bring the database into a sort of a 21st century standard. That left after a ending year fund balance of approximately $1.4 million. The placeholder budget adopted by your board didn't change service and supplies. It left it the same. However, it reduced PUAC charges to $352,000. That's equivalent to 1.8 FTEs. Recall that core services have been at 2.1 for 9 years, and that we're asking for 2.9 this year. So that level of effort would obviously reduce core services and or the additional tasks you've asked us to work on. The contingency, for some reason, was reduced to $25,000, and I'm sorry, I wasn't at the meeting, so I don't know, I didn't hear the full discussion. But the database wanted to be removed, as I understood, and this took us below previously approved levels, or levels that you told us to keep, 100,000 in the past. The budget issues before you today for your consideration as a result of your conversation in July and then things we've heard from the community are that penalty money should only be used to buy water and for project grants, not for staffing. PUAC charges are too high. Some of the additional tasks may be unnecessary, or we can move more slowly. The database revamp is unnecessary or too costly. We need a line item for outside counsel to review some of what county council has opinions, and that the county staff is conflicted. We've also heard that there's not a reason to recommend to fund the Oxnard Plain Users Group anymore, as they have stepped forward and agreed to pick that up themselves. So those are our recommendations. They're in line with what is presented in your letter, and we're ready to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, let's, Steve.
Yeah, my first question is, could you go back 2 slides to the concerns raised? You went through those budget issues for board consideration. Those are issues that have been raised. Those are not your recommendations.
That's correct.
Okay. You're just saying, you just wanted to acknowledge people have brought those things up. Your recommendations are
Our recommendation is the budget we presented on 7/22.
right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Who wants to start with questions, or do we want to hear from the audience? Just what would you folks like to do? Okay. Anybody in the audience? Okay. I think what they say at Price is Right, come on down.
Okay.
So good to see you, John.
I'm John
Come
Matthews
on
with
down.
Pleasant Valley County Water District. Before I start on my comments, that will be in addition to the comments I made last month. First of all, I think we missed something in public comment, and I apologize for that, is to congratulate the United Water Conservation District on the cow trout settlement. That's a big issue for all of us that farm on the plain and anybody that takes water on the Oxnard Plain and the city of Oxnard. So congratulations on that.
Let me interrupt for a second, since you brought the issue up. If I were to point to an individual that was critical to making that settlement work, it's Mike Solomon.
I agree.
Without Mike's commitment and the relationship building he did with the folks at CalTrout, I think it's fair to say that the board members would have jumped off the cliff. It is Mike that kept the board in check. It kept CalTrout in check. And Mike, you did a yeoman's job in moving that ball forward. Our work is not done yet because we have to implement what we agreed to. But I will tell you that the relationship between United and CalTrout is better than it's ever been before. It's an open dialogue, and 90% of that is because of the work that Mike has done. So if you have any congratulations, it goes to Mike.
Oh, I don't want to do that.
Okay, and I know that, but you know, I have to say it because I have to say it. So anyway.
Okay. Before I begin my comments, also, I'd like to express gratitude to the staff who's worked since the last board meeting to this. I know they've put a lot of time in looking at this and trying to make sure that people's questions were answered. And since we're passing kudos around, particularly Chair Mulhart, who met with several boards, went out of his way, took kind of a traveling show out through the county to make sure that people were heard on this, and that's greatly appreciated. So, the only comments I have in addition to the one I made last month, where I said that I hated budgets. I don't like reading them. I never comment them for my own boards. They always give me a copy of it, and I throw it in the trash. Is that it's a philosophical thing from Pleasant Valley's standpoint, and that is, one, as Mr. Pratt mentioned, the concept of running an agency basically on pump charges versus penalties. One of the concerns that I've heard expressed by my board and some of the people I've talked to on the plain is basically, as policymakers, you need to be cautious if you start to run an organization based upon penalties that you're getting in. Ultimately, those penalties will run out. I mean, we're not everybody out there is doing things that are inconsistent with the ordinances of the GMA. And you've gotten some big penalties recently. That money is good to have, but I think you got to be very cautious on how you utilize that money. It's kind of a concept between capital versus O&M. And I would think that the O&M of this district ought to be run basically on the pump charges, on the day-to-day things that you get year in, year out. The quote-unquote capital that the agency has, you might want to look at those penalties. I know there's a philosophical difference between myself and some of the board members on whether or not those penalties can be used to prompt projects that people are looking at in the county. One of the concerns is that you don't have enough money to really get past the tipping point of any particular project. I disagree with that. I think there are projects in the county, for example, the TAP project, which is an expensive project, but it's not in the tens of millions. And some type of a seed grant from this organization, if you can legally do it, I think might help bring that type of a project to fruition. That project doesn't regulate anything. It doesn't study anything. It doesn't do anything other than bring more water into the county and bring an additional 6,000 acre-feet of water into this county. That's important. And anything when I say we, I mean all of us here can do to make that project. And if it was a project in the Las Posas area, I'd have the same feelings about it. Let's look at the monies that we've, basically, I won't say lucked out because we've enforced things, have brought in here. I hate to see those frittered away with just studies upon studies upon studies. And I know you as policymakers don't do that, and I know Jeff doesn't do that either from his standpoint. His staff doesn't do that. But I think that always has to be at the forefront of your mind is how do we make the best use of our money? And for me, it's not studies. For me, it's not drilling more test wells on things to make sure, as we pointed out last time about the boundary dispute. I'd hate to see this organization take a lot of money and go out and drill a bunch of test wells so you got the boundary exactly right. And Charlotte, you chided me last time, said you're the first attorney I've ever heard says don't be precise. Well, that's what I'm telling you. You don't have to be exactly precise in everything you do. There is some risk in life. I think all of us in today's world are more minimalist than we were a few years back. I think that's the way this organization has always operated. I think you got to stick true to those goals. And when you look at things you need to get done, you ought to make sure you really need to get them done this year or next year or the year after, every year when you come to the budget. As I said, I'm not a budget number cruncher or anything. I don't really understand them. I just know the philosophy that most of you have in your service, that you ought to make sure you get what you pay for. So thanks.
Thanks, John. Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Craig Underwood from Zone Water Company, and thank you, Lynn, for coming out and listening to our concerns. Lynn's heard mostly what I want to say, but I wanted to say it for the rest of the board as well. The budget created some anguish out in the countryside, and I think that was largely due, or not largely due, but partly due to the fact that, what Marty was talking about earlier. I didn't hear all of it, but I'm pretty sure I know what he had to say. We were looking at a budget that was almost doubling in a year. It was being funded by penalties. And it looked to us like, we were creating an incentive to go out and issue more penalties, which seemed to be borne out by the number of letters that were going out, suggesting that people were going to be paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. And even if you were a little late in filing your efficiency report, you're going to be paying $500 in fines. So this all kind of resulted in several meetings by our pumpers, which included Zone, Cayugas, Burrowwood, Arroyo Las Posas, Del Norte, Alta Mutual, Pleasant Valley. And I think our concern was magnified by, the very thing that I was saying. It seems like the conscientious water users who were being targeted, as well as those who were overpumping the aquifer. We all want to make sure that the situations like occurred where we've had some entities come in and way overpump what is a sustainable use of the aquifer don't occur again. And Lynn has explained to us his view of how those penalty monies should be used, that the GMA needs to find ways of making sure that doesn't happen again. And I certainly support that, because we like to see the GMA be a facilitator, a fair referee, and an agency that can make sure that we are working towards a sustainable yield. And the various water companies that work within the GMA, I think, can come up with some positive programs to improve our water use if the GMA can make sure that those projects can happen. So thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Anybody else?
Mike Solomon, General Manager, United Water Conservation District. I unfortunately didn't attend the meeting last week. I was dealing with lawsuit stuff. But from our perspective, especially on the penalty, and many of you know, I am a budget person. That's what I did for 28 years, so I enjoyed reading the document.
You're weird. I want you to understand. You're just weird.
Drove me nuts. But as far as the penalty monies, there's a way from United's perspective on this. Yeah, we'd like to see the penalty monies go toward getting new, not just necessarily buying new water, but helping to fund projects that help sustain long-term water coming in. It's the old concept, and I think Lynn shared it with me. Is, you know, you can teach a man to fish, and you can give a man a fish, or you can teach him to fish, and they go for life. And you know that's
A
summarized.
salmon or a trout?
No, no trout.
Yeah.
No trout. We don't eat trout here. But the idea of funding projects that help create long-term benefits from where that water was overdrafted. The water cap program is, John mentioned, great project to bring water exactly in the place where it was overdrafted. We're looking right now at making an offer to purchase the Farrell pit, which is going to help us provide replacement water there. And I had talked to Lynn, maybe helping fund those kind of things too. But we understand there are other issues here in the GMA, and at United, we support using some of those penalty monies to bring the GMA up to the 21st century. Have the right tools and the right people so you can be efficient to do your job, because we don't have to be exact, but we've seen the troubles we get into when we don't catch something for 5 or 6 years, and then we have to try to figure it out. So we would support using some of the penalty monies for those work plans that you've already approved, the things that make you more efficient as an agency. Not that just create more and more bureaucracy, but things, a good database, whatever it is that makes you more efficient. And then some of that money to be used to grant toward projects that help bring water back to where it was overdrafted. Now, I know there's an opinion that under the enabling ordinance, you can't use those money for those projects. You know, I would respectfully disagree as I read that, and if after the attorneys all look at it and say, no, that's what it says, then I say we look at changing the enabling ordinance so those monies, right now 8.1 conflicts with what we're being told on the enabling ordinance. We need to get it fixed so that that money can be used to help bring water back to where it was overdrafted and start putting the water back in the ground. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Anybody else? Okay. Dan? Miranda, show that.
I'm Dan Nauman. I just wanted to add to everything that was said so far is, you know, the GMA has been very fortunate because we're here because of the state, but at the same time, we don't have the feds, we don't have the state breathing down our neck telling us what and how to do things. And everybody in this room, over the years and decades, have worked together from Ordinance 5 to Ordinance 8. And we're making the rules, we're setting the format to take care of our water community. And I think that's what we got to remember, is that we've got the control here to do the things we have to do. And what Mike said is we need to update our efficiencies, review the staff, how many bodies we need, where to put them, where to have them. So I just wanted to kind of put that back on the table. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Anybody else? Okay, let me, who would like to, I'm searching, Steve? Go ahead.
If everybody's reluctant, I don't mind starting out. I've tried to get caught up in terms of the comments that were made last July at the meeting in July and stuff, and I welcome this opportunity to try to go forward. And I appreciate when I've heard comments like from Mr. Underwood, and you know, I just like to put this perspective on it. Whenever you try to make an effort to improve where you are in an organizational thing like this, you're going to stub your toe some. I think the issue of the letters crossing and, you know, not enough time between when people received and when people got notified that, you know, those are a problem, and we should do everything we can to try to fix those. But fundamentally, if you look at this agency, I think from the outside, and somebody said, do you know that the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, that's been in existence for a long time, many years, still doesn't know for sure how much water is being pumped, because they have, I don't know how many dozens of people that aren't even reporting, and we're not sure who's reporting and who's not reporting and how much is being pumped. I think you have to say, you have to get that problem solved first. You can't be fair, and although it appears that, you know, the good pumpers, you know, that were out there trying to, you know, get more money from the good pumpers so we can get more penalties to keep running the agency. I just from just coming on here with no sort of perspective or bias at all, I see these people up here, they're trying to do one thing. They're trying to make sure we actually treat everybody fair, and that the people who are making a good faith effort to comply are not being disadvantaged by those people that are out there that have a tendency to do everything they can to say, I didn't get the notice, and it was confusing, and I didn't, and year after year they say that and they do that, and so that is why you have, I think that just increases frustration. It decreases the credibility of the agency overall, and if you have to prioritize things, I think you absolutely fundamentally have to prioritize accuracy all the way around. And so when somebody says you don't have to be that precise, you do have to be that accurate when you're saying, we're going to find somebody, and if you're going to say we're never going to find anybody, the goal isn't to find everybody. The goal is to have everybody comply so that those that are complying aren't disadvantaged by those who are not complying. And so I think you have to prioritize having a database that is not a 1979 old database that isn't even supported any longer, that can't do the job. And the number of times I've asked questions how they have to go by hand and go back through old paper documents and all of that. We don't have that. So we are just not at that level. Once we get to that level, I think we do everything that we can to do what you had just identified, which is run the agency as lean as possible. But to try to run the agency lean while it's still while it's still broken, I would offer, is really a mistake, and will ultimately erode support of those people who are complying, will ultimately erode support of the public and everybody else if we don't get a handle and demonstrate. We know who's pumping, we know what's being pumped, we have as reasonable of understanding as possible as to what safe yield is, and we're making reasonable estimates to get there. So I came here in the middle of this work plan. As I've reviewed the work plan, I think you've made common sense decisions. It's not a wasteful, it's not an empire building kind of thing. It is an attempt to try to fix a problem, and you could very easily scale the empire back after you get these things, after you get the efficiencies of having a good database and those other things. So overall, I think now is the time, and I think I've heard some other board members say that as we talked about, now is the time for us to get this problem solved. It is the right time. We've had some significant penalties, and people know that there is the possibility if they don't comply. Now's the time for us to do that, not to vacillate back and find ourselves stuck and unable to do that. At the same time, my emphasis for staff will be, you can do that, and you can still keep that personal touch. You can still keep that flavor of integrity and the ability of people to work, and that's the challenge that I think we have to just remind staff. When we're doing these things, that staff's doing those things, by the way, they sent those letters at our request, they've got to make sure that they're paying attention to that, to holding on to that thing that also makes the groundwater agency the special sort of arrangement that it has been. Thank you.
Okay.
The only difference I would see with that, my analogy would be that we were having a family gathering. We found out there was a burglar in the yard, so we turned the dogs loose, and all they did was bite our friends and relatives.
And to the extent that happens, I completely agree with you. It's unfortunate. We've got to do everything we can to do that. But I wouldn't say, therefore, let's not protect the family from the burglar.
The problem, though, is that there's the mindset that we are an enforcement agency, not a facilitation agency, seems to have developed, and I find that as unfortunate.
Charlotte?
Yeah. I gotta tell you, I spent a long time in the last few days, and after about a day, I finally figured out these pages were numbered, and then it made a little bit more sense to me.
Lynn didn't give you his glasses back.
No. As I went through all the fine print on all 4 pages of this, and then studied this, I was most interested in where the authority came from for the various tasks that had been put in. Because that seemed to be the heart of the discussion at the last meeting. How did we get all this stuff on the list? Where did all this come from? And I know a lot of the people who spoke thought that staff had just put it in or put it on the list, and the implication was they had wanted to build an empire. So I went through and I read all of these things, and it's listed under statutory authority or activity examples and work products, but sometimes it spills over as to what it is. And the core things are the things that Jeff mentioned that are going to have to be done no matter what, and I don't think anybody's been questioning those. When you get down to the other things, those are the things that the board has directed that we wanted done. And we've talked about them at various times. We've talked about them one at a time, sometimes two at a time. And those are things that, at least at that meeting or that series of meetings more often, we as board members thought it was important. Not always all five of us, but at least three and often four, sometimes five, thought it was important for us to do those things and make sure they were completed before we could proceed to the next level of efficiency or enforcement or whatever it was we were talking about being done. The thing that I think we didn't look at was the aggregate. And I think we didn't know what the bottom line was going to be until we got all those things on one list and it came out in the next year, or now it'd be the current year's budget. And when we looked at all those things that we thought were important on an individual basis that had been added to the core tasks, they added up to a lot of money. And I think because that amount of money happened to be there from various sources, mostly penalties, some of them fines, some of it the regular charges, I think there was an assumption made that we plan to continue doing everything at the extended level and always have the added staff or the added contracts that required the additional amount of money, and we would therefore be building an empire, and that's the word I kept hearing last time. Personally, all of the things that we talked about doing to make us more efficient or to get us where we need to be in the 21st century, or to find out what our boundaries are. I think if you're going to talk about boundaries, you do need to be precise, because if you're going to move boundaries or you're not sure where your boundaries are, you certainly can't send people letters finding them if they're not within the boundaries. You may as well spend money finding out exactly where your boundaries are beforehand instead of on lawyers afterwards to have a court decide because you're trying to enforce something that somebody says isn't relative to his piece of property or her piece of property or the municipality's piece of property, whatever it is. So I think all of those tasks are important, just as I thought they were at the time that I voted for them. Or I don't ever remember not voting for one of them, but if I didn't vote for them, in most situations for the past 23 years, I've figured if it passed the majority, that's the way it is, and I lost that battle at that time. There are a very few things that I have continued to vote against, but this isn't one of those things. So at the last meeting, I supported the recommended budget, and I still pass the recommended budget, support the recommended budget. The only other thing I want to address is the comment that was about you can't just walk in and talk to people now. I don't think that's because anybody wants to be unfriendly. It's because at some time, probably in this building, just as they did in Camarillo City Hall and every city hall where the Sheriff's Department is the enforcing agency for security and laws, they did a survey or an assessment of the building, and they said, your building, and this was mainly after some people walked into Riverside City Hall and shot 3 or 4 council members, a city manager, and several other staff members, and all of the government agencies in Southern California had their police department or their sheriff's department, whoever handles things in their jurisdiction, do an assessment, and in almost all of them we got to where people can't just walk in behind the counters anymore. We all have a check-in process, and it may make you feel uncomfortable, but it was the only way we could come up with security. If people breach that, buttons are pushed and the sheriff comes. And I don't know that we're ever going to go back to the way things used to be as far as security is handled. But as far as other things and being more friendly, I think that we can certainly try that in the future.
Okay. Dave, do you want me to speak, or you want to speak? What do you want to do? Like Steve, I was not at the last board meeting. I think I was someplace elsewhere, obviously.
West Pleasant.
Well, someplace in Europe.
Having a better time.
That's where I seem to go all the time now. I did get a full briefing on the last board meeting. Jeff briefed me, Dan Nauman briefed me, and out of that briefing I felt, and I got a briefing from my board at United on what ought to be our direction, and I spent time chatting with them. And I felt that one of the things we need to do is do some outreach. People have referenced it, so for the record, I met with the PV board, I met with Craig, I met with Kiegas, Don Kendall, and Ted Granson yesterday. Craig put together another meeting with the Zone Board and Burlwood and some others, and I spent, I think I was there about 2.5 hours. I was 2 hours with Kiegas, and almost 3 hours, 2.5 hours, I think, with PV and others. And what I tried to do was to give them what my vision of the GMA ought to be, not your vision, and hopefully it is our vision, but I want you to realize it's my ideas. And, each of us have our own ideas. And not to make this a 2-hour discussion to talk about all the things I talked about, because I answered a lot of questions, but see if I can give you a thumbnail of my concepts. And my concept basically is that it's like a three-legged, I've used this, those who are at the meetings have heard me say it, so I'll say it again. It's like a three-legged stool. Without one of those legs, the stool doesn't work. And I think that the water policy in this county, in our area, works because we have really good major agencies that have the technical expertise, they understand their systems, they have the legal expertise, they have the groundwater expertise, they have the brain power to think of ideas, and they come up with projects. And every one is slightly unique and slightly different because their responsibilities are slightly unique and different. And to make the water policy work, you got to have a set of projects. And United and Kiegas and Zone and PV and Camarillo and Oxnard and Ventura all are coming up with projects to take them forward down the road. I think the second leg of the stool is money. There are no freebies in this business. Somewhere along the line, you either have to pay it yourself or figure out how to suck it out of the federal government, which is going to be impossible in the future, or the state, and every one of our entities have made trips, numerous trips to Washington asking for federal funds. Money drives the agenda. There is no freebie. Bill Gates Foundation is not going to flop $40 million in our lap. And so the projects that come up have to stand a financial test, and that is in fact a balancing act. And I think the third leg of that process is what we do. there needs to be a referee. There needs to be a central point where the rules by which one project can operate and be amortized over the life of that project doesn't interfere with two other projects that are already in place. How do you decide those rules? There ought to be referees. There ought to be an umpire. And umpires and referees do not play the game. I don't go see the Dodgers play to watch the referees. I go to the Dodger game to see the Dodgers beat X. And I hope the referees get the calls right. And that in itself is an art with instant replay and the like. I believe that our mission in life at the GMA is to facilitate a regulatory environment that evens the playing field for everybody, so that everybody knows what everybody's project does and has an opportunity to say, I'm okay with that project because it's a good project. It will help the aquifer. It will solve our long-term requirement to bring the aquifer into balance, and it is not unfair, and it doesn't adversely affect what I'm doing. We need that referee. There are things we can be, and there are things we cannot be. I think it's to have the GMA staff targeting, figuring out where to dole out grant monies and the like. I think that could be a whole project unto itself. What would be the model that I would create for us? The model that I would create for us is, if PV comes up with a project and says, we think this will work within our system, they need to be able to go to a GMA. The GMA needs to look at that project, go down the list and say it meets this rule, this rule, this rule, doesn't meet that rule and that rule. And that's where we need to stop and say, can we change that rule? Can we change that rule to make that project work? And if we do change that rule, in the grand scheme of things, that's a viable project, and the unintended consequences are not unacceptable. Therefore, the project goes through. What you have to realize is that when we created the GMA 25 years ago, I wasn't here. Phil Drescher and John Flynn and Art Goulet and others worked hard to create the GMA. And when they handed us our piece of legislation, we did not go across the street and pick up from Schmo's groundwater agency their manual and put it in and say, okay, we'll just do that. We created everything. Every rule that we have, every word that is written that we operate with is our creation. We created it with the best minds and the best energy. John, you and I have sat through, and Rob, we have sat through meetings. You guys were patient as I just carried them on and on and on, and eventually the sausage came out the other end. It wasn't pretty, but we created a set of rules, and we tried to come up with anticipating every one of the nuances that would go with that set of rules. And I think for the longest time, we did a great job. For me personally, I believe we got a wake-up call in this last year and a half. We had 3 major entities do things in our backyard that have cost them a lot of money, have cost us a lot of time, and raised the flag that our rules are not perfect. There are holes in our rules, and people are driving freight trains through them, and we got to put a stop to that. Some of those mistakes are because of our own inadequacies, that we didn't have the database in time. I mean, if we had tracked the fact that somebody had not been pumping correctly for 10 years, we could have stopped it 10 years ago. I don't want their money. I want them to stop pumping. If at the end of this process, in 10 or 15 years, we go to the state of California and you say, you know what, the basin is not in safe yield, but we're collecting $2 million a year in penalties, we failed. We failed because our mandate is not to collect penalties. Our mandate is to bring the aquifer into safe balance. But we have to have penalties to make the rules stand. We ought to put that money to good use to fix the rules that are broken. The debate, and it was one of the slides, is to run the agency on pump charges. I agree, run the agency on pump charges. Personally, I don't want to see my pump charge go from $4 to $6. That's a 50% increase. Why the heck should I have to pay to come up with the money to solve the problems that the violators created? Thank you for the money. Now I'm going to turn around and close the door as fast as I can so we don't have violators in the future. I share the concern that if we build an agency run on penalties, it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You'll go hunt for penalties to keep the agency going, and one of the proposals that I heard at Zone was, why don't we come up with a 2 or 3 year budget that shows how the penalty monies will essentially disappear as we in fact solve the problems. I'm okay with that. I'm not sure we can do it this year in this budget, but it may be one of the strategies we have to do going in the future. I believe, and going back to the founders of the GMA, Phil Drescher and Art Goulet and John Flynn. Phil Drescher told me when I first joined United some 25 years ago, and the GMA, I think 23 years or whatever the goofball number is. And what he said was, Lynn, the GMA will in effect become the adjudicator of the basin. If you get it right, you will do it, you will adjudicate the basin on an ongoing basis, and you'll do it at the local level, and you'll do it with local constituents. If you get it wrong, the state of California will adjudicate the basin, you will pay for adjudicating the basin, and the attorneys, no offense to the attorneys, but they will put all their kids through college 10 times over. My grand plan over all these years was to never once allow the state of California or the attorneys to adjudicate our basin. And that's why when I started this process, I dealt with it as an open forum, town hall style committee. In your capacity as supervisor, you deal with so many big committees. Trying to do it this way would be impossible, and I understand that. We have a unique opportunity here to get it right. And if we're not getting it right because people feel intimidated by going into staff, we got to fix that problem. If there's problems of going into the county building because of security, I understand that. I deal in the corporate world. Of all the industries that we have to deal with, folks, you get to deal with the TSA. I have to deal with the TSA. It is ludicrous that I have to be inspected for a weapon to board my airplane. But I suck it up on every damn flight, and I've gotten very close to being hauled to jail, I will tell you. By the Brits and by the French. And I suck it up. Because why? It's the truth of the reality. Check me for a weapon on an airplane. Are you out of your frickin' mind? But that's the game I have to play. So if we have to play a security game here at the county, we're going to have to do that. If we have to play a security game at United, and we do, we have locked doors at United. But at United, we've been able to keep a friendly atmosphere, and we will work to solve that problem. If we have to work to solve the problem of a series of letters that went out and kind of got lost in the shuffle, from time to time we got it wrong. We'll fix that problem. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to pledge to you that I'm willing to spend penalty monies to go out and find new water, knowing that I have holes in the ordinance and a system in place where we can have folks that are sitting on the fringe play games with the numbers and then have to play catch up. We need to move ourselves out of the business of being reactive and get ourselves in the business of proactive. And at the end of this process, if we can get very efficient at what we do, get this list in place, get these problems solved, get our database in place, do all the things we talk about, and at the end of that matrix, we've got money left over at the end of that process, and somebody comes up with a plan, John PV or Zone comes up with a plan. I told the Zone folks, they come up with a plan, but they don't have the technical expertise to kind of run it up and down a technical analysis. It would be good use of GMA funds to float a $25,000 grant and get that analysis done. To me, now we're doing our job. But our fundamental job, let's make no mistake about it. You can't play a Little League game without referees. A Little League game without referees. You can't play a high school game. The only game I know that you can play without referees, I believe, is hockey. I don't understand the game, and they beat each other up, and so I flip the channel and I don't watch it. But the fact of the matter is, if you do not have a set of rules that people understand, that are clear, concise, fair, reasonable, and thought out by us, and assigned to ourselves by us, we will lose this game. And the record of adjudication across this state, between the Mojave Basin and the Valley and Santa Maria and others, I don't ever want to get there. I believe that we've set in motion a great system. Let's not underfund it. Let's spend the dollars we have now, get these problems solved, be better at managing it, be better at making sure we spend the dollars efficiently, that we don't waste time and energy, and we don't lose the fact that we are a agency to respect our clients. That's our constituency. We can do all those things. Let's get on with the process of managing that. And so I would support the budget as submitted. Now, with a couple of exceptions, and I'll throw those out, because this is the message I've heard as I've gone around. There is concern that we may have too much on our plate. And one of the items that they think we ought to take a look at is the expenditure for the computer system. And maybe a way to deal with that issue is not to put it off forever, but take a look at cycling it through on the next budget after we go through a process of looking at maybe even a bid process to see if in fact we're getting the correct database process for the money that's being spent. The $25,000 that was on the budget for the PV issue was there, as you recall, because I asked that it be put there. And in that process of going from putting it on the table to where we are today, John has told me and Tommy has told me that the folks at PV have recognized this is their problem, this is their world, they want to solve it, they want to take care of it. John has agreed to facilitate those meetings, and we don't need the $25,000. Take the $25,000 out. I have no problems with that, because we got what I really wanted, and that was ownership of that problem by PV, ownership of that problem by the folks that are going to be affected. Kiegas has stepped up to the table to act as the facilitator of the Las Posas area. We've got two major areas right now being looked at to see how we're going to bring those areas into safe yield by doing it as a community outreach process, and a lot of that was facilitated, the movement to facilitate that was generated by the work of the GMA. I believe that's good expenditure of our money. We're not building projects. We're not out trying to come up with the next idea. No one in United is sitting around saying, geez, I can't wait for the GMA to come up with the next projects for us to do. We have nothing to do. It doesn't work that way. United is busy dreaming up projects beyond your belief. And if anything we do at United is we try to slow staff down and saying, okay, we can't do 12 of them, boil it down. And once they come up with that project, they need to know there's a forum that they can take that project to and know that it'll get a fair review, a public review, public input into the process. At the end, we will make the rules work if it is good for the aquifer and accomplishes what we all want, and that is to bring us in safe yield. If we meet those tests, we will make the rules meet that test. If it doesn't meet that test, if it's not good for the aquifer and it doesn't bring us into safe yield, then it's probably not a good project in the long term. So we have to use some kind of criteria. So my sense would be, in hearing from constituents, if you want to approve, I would be comfortable with approving the total budget as submitted by staff. I would be comfortable submitting the budget with the $25,000 taken out for the PV charges and the computer charges taken out, with some kind of direction to staff to look at some kind of process to deal with that issue, either as a bid process or create an RFP, I think that's the term, a request for bid. And if that brings our number down, I'm okay with that. But to go back to some number that we used a year and a half ago arbitrarily, it makes no sense to me at all. And I think your comments are right on. We've got to plug these holes. That's the first thing we have to do. We have to have confidence in what we do. Mike's comments are correct. We cannot bite all the people in our backyard as we try to get the burglar out. And I think we screwed up on that one, and we'll have to fix that one. And I think Zone's concerns that they expressed to me, and PV's concerns they expressed to me, that we do not want to see this agency run on penalty charges going forward. There ought to be a sunset mechanism to those, and if the mechanism is that we come up with a multiple-year budget, I'm okay with that. I think we can manage all those, and I think we need to listen to our constituents in some of those areas, and I'm willing to take out those two items or adjust those two items if that's what you guys want to do.
Okay, I'll go.
I think Charlotte said it very well when there seemed to have been some assumptions that, and it would be easy to assume in looking at the bottom lines and looking at past years, and I think a general reaction out there in the countryside of, whoa, what's going on here? And I think that's a natural assumption. I mean, we in business see it every day. The state's running out of money, and more responsibilities, things that were responsibilities of the state, are being pushed onto private business. We see it in just about every facet of our daily life. And so to assume the same thing may be going on here, I think is a natural suspicion. I do believe that perhaps folks in the countryside didn't fully understand the level of housekeeping that needs to be done. There are many past jobs and things that just do need to get cleaned up. They've been said here. Issues of boundaries and of past irrigation efficiencies that haven't been applied for, and that whole myriad of things is just part of being a professional operation that we do need to get done. And I have supported that all along. What makes people in the countryside anxious is when they see documents that say things like redefine the scope, prepare a study for the board. It doesn't give people a sense that there's any work being done. I'm not saying that hasn't been the case, but I do think that the public wants to see this housekeeping stuff finished, and they want us to see a professional operation that they know they can come to with projects or issues, and that we can deal with them in a professional and timely fashion. So I am in support of that. I have supported, just on a basis of theory in the past, the additional work tasks, even though I thought, and I have said before that I thought maybe some of the numbers were higher than they needed to be. Whatever, it's a budget. I come from a place where we look at budgets very carefully. If in farming you misfigure your budget, that makes a big deal on your bottom line at the end. And so I do go things line by line, and I ask questions, and it's just how I was taught. I still think there's quite a bit of excess in this budget. I think we have contingencies in here that I don't agree with. I'm pleased to hear that the chair is thinking that maybe we ought to set aside that database contingency. But I want to make it clear, I'm not against redoing the database. What I'm against is being given a number that was generated from the county technical services group that this is what it's going to cost. Well, that's maybe what they can do it for. But let's get the full picture of maybe what a private guy could do it for also before we make that decision. I think we as a board have a responsibility to the public to ascertain, do a bid process. And I'm for doing it now. Let's go out to bid. Let's come back in 60 days with an agenda item. And let's make a decision and get it going. I think the database thing is important. I always have. I think we need more information to make that decision. I'm in agreement with Lynn about the users group in Oxnard. And I've said that before. The Las Posas group is paying their way, and I think Oxnard ought to as well. And I think John Matthews told us last time that they were going to do that. And so that's easy. The other issue I think I would bring up is that, and this is probably going the opposite direction than what people might expect, but I do think we need a bigger number on the legal line item. I think that needs to be a number that we can look at. We've said in the past, well, we've got this big contingency. Okay, that's another way to handle it. But I think it's important for us to have a number for staff to see and even the public to see that we're serious about getting these issues of boundaries, other legal issues, other questions that maybe make our ordinances weak, fixed. So, I mean, I would propose putting that number at double what we have, or even make it 100,000. I think that makes sense to have a line item that is a good legal number. So I'm in closing. I'm kind of willing to go along again, but what I'm hearing is that people want action. They want to see this stuff get done. They don't want to see report writing. They don't want to be studying. They don't want to be redefining issues. They want to see things get done. And so I'll go along with what you said, Lynn, and with maybe the one caveat that I'd like to see if we can come to a different agreement on that legal number.
What if we took the 125,000 that's currently in there for computer, and we cut it up somehow to move part of that over to the legal issue?
Fine.
With a separate task that between now and X date, the staff needs to come up with a process to look to an outside vendor. Let's compare what the county's willing to offer with what an outside vendor. One of the issues I think that was raised, I think Craig raised it. There was concern about where the database would be. What computer? Is it a county computer? And I think you told me, Jeff, no, it's basically it's our own PC sitting on the wall someplace or on a table someplace. So it's our system, and what we have to do is we have to figure out a computer program to give us the database that we want. Should we bid that? That's the comment I'm hearing from folks. So maybe if we take and shift some of the money we allocated for a computer database and spend this year or a portion of this year figuring out a bidding process, sequester some of that money towards a legal fund, and primarily what I think Dave is referring to is that there may be a point in time when, again, taking my model, somebody brings us a project, we go through the list, we say yes, 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 no, no, we say we can change the ordinance with these two yeses, and Al makes his opinion on it, and like a good doctor, we go out and get a second opinion just to make sure that we haven't triggered some unintended consequences if that needs to be the case. Maybe that's how we do that process, and I think that's what I heard from some folks as well. We ought to have in our tool bag the ability to go out and utilize the money to make sure the rules that we draft are in fact correct, in addition to our own staff. Would that do it if we shifted the money around?
Yeah, I understand your concept. Yeah, I think I agree with that.
Could I get to clarification? I'm kind of swirling here. You're saying take the money for computers and figure out a bidding process and take the money away from and then the database work would be coming later? I mean, can't it all be in the same budget year? As I see it, we're 2 months late in developing this budget. Should have been done before the end of June. So we're now past the middle of August. So we got 10 months left to go, assuming we approve a budget today. You don't think that they can develop a bidding process and get it to us, and we can make a decision, and we can still get our database squared away this year? Or am I just way off in left field, not understanding what you're saying?
No. My original position is I believe that the database, and I have said to folks, I believe the database needs to be done sooner than later. I think it's critical to the efficiency of the agency. That was the message I carried out when I dealt with folks in the marketplace. The message I got back to the folks in the marketplace was, we think it needs to come out. So I am carrying their message back, saying that what I'm hearing from some folks in the marketplace is that the database needs to be done, but just arbitrarily picking $125,000 up without going through some kind of analysis that may be a less expensive way of doing it, getting what we want, by using outside vendors rather than purely the county IT function, and that's where the number came from, may be a better use of the funds. And so I'm carrying that message that I heard in the marketplace. If if everybody says we have to get the database and the only way to do it is to allocate the $125,000 budget, but before we spend the money, we'll go through this process, that could be another way of solving it. But I'm trying to respond to the comments that I heard in the marketplace. Jeff.
Point of clarification, maybe recently the IT services has said something about 125. That number came from me.
Oh.
That was an educated guess based on a lot of experience with developing our own software packages. And it was an amount that your board would have been reviewing as we made progress. The amount in the budget right now is 115. We've spent 10,000 mapping, trying to figure out what the current system does and what we need, current state versus future state, doing the logic patterns so that we can start coding. There is no off-the-shelf system that we can buy to track credits, to track allocations, to track the plumbing, to track all the things that the deals that the board makes in this venue, because it's unique, like you said. So if we go out for an RFP, we're going to be looking for a coder. And the coder can compete against IT services. That's easy to do. And to answer Charlotte's question, certainly, and Director Borchard's question, excuse me, we can get that done in a couple months. But you're looking at, you're going to be dealing with coders who are going to give you really round numbers, and they're going to be difficult to manage outside because downstairs, we're over their shoulders, we're in their faces. Outside, they send you something, and you look at it.
Let me ask one further question on that. We put an amount in the budget for this item. That does not provide an allocation to spend the money. It would have to come back to the board for approval before you could set up a way to do this conversion. Is that correct? Or
Yes.
am I not correct?
No, you're correct the way this budget's set up. It was included in the contingency line item, and it could have been included above the line, above that. But there are a couple ways it could work. It could be absorbed in PWAC charges, essentially. PWAC is something we started off with when it was only public works people working on GMA issues. And I might add that, just for clarification, we're not picking people up that are sitting around with nothing to do in their cubicles. You work for Jeff, you're always juggling more balls than you can handle. Jeff's job is to make sure you keep the ones in the air that are supposed to be in the air. So what we're doing is reprioritizing work for people that are working on other things, broadening the capabilities. We may have to go out for contracts on some of this stuff, but there's no excess capacity here or loose stuff that we're permanently in training. This is a surge in effort to get these legacy issues done, and we fully intend to get it back down to a level your board's comfortable with in the future. We've all got other things we could be doing. But I'm back to Director Craven's question. The idea is that if we put in the PWAC charges and your board said go on this issue, we could turn IT loose without coming back because they're essentially part of the county family. It's county charges now, not just public works agency charges. Or we could, at your board's direction, come back in increments, bid the thing, go out to a coder outside who can do this. It's strictly up to your board.
Okay. Steve?
If I could, number one, I'm really, I know we haven't heard from Mike yet, but that at least the majority of us are saying we should go forward with the database. Because, as you said, if we need it, it doesn't make any sense to wait another year and a half and be working with this old database. So I think we're there for that. The question is the amount that's being, and it's interesting, it's not being put in the budget, it's being put in contingency, which can be used for anything. The contingency can be used for the legal fees, the contingency can be used for the database, and I think it's almost awkward for us to try to decide how much do we want to have as contingencies for potential legal stuff, but I support you completely. If we need more legal help this year, I don't want to be constrained by the budget because that is essential to us being able to have the legal foundation to enforce the rules and the things that we want to do. So I don't have any problem with that. I'm just saying procedurally from working with the budget, if we want to give ourselves the maximum flexibility and be able to move it between the database and between legal, because we don't know what legal charges may be and we don't know what the database charges may be, my sense is you just leave it unlabeled in the contingency. Then staff has to come to us and sell us on the project and say, you know, we want to take some funds out of contingency for either legal or for this, and that lets us review all of that. Number one. Number two, I'm perfectly so that would be my recommendation to you to accomplish the exact same thing. I mean, we can right now. I think if we can say as part of the budget, our direction to staff is 2 additional work tasks. 1, get going on some kind of bid process on the database, right? And 2, don't hesitate to come back to us with taking funds from the contingency for any legal issues that come up. Don't be hesitant in terms of that, because that's important. Those would be 2 policy directions that I think would be the most appropriate way for us to deal with it from a budget standpoint. And if I could just digress into one other thing, and you know, as we, in a sense, going out and asking staff to go and get this bid, you know, is a little bit like asking for a study, you know, because you have to sort of identify, you know, what's the work, you know, the staff's going to actually have to do work. And so it's just interesting. You're right, it's the language. When people read that and they go study, it all depends. If it's Jeff Pratt's department, the study means they're probably producing something pretty valuable, and if with other government agencies, sometimes it's not. So I think we should probably be careful about our language, but that's really what this is it's a sort of a study of who's the best to go with. And I'll leave you with that. I have seen over and over again, particularly government agencies that have been involved with school districts, city, and county, as they've tried to do this database work, many times get hung out to dry halfway through the process with somebody you know, doing it. And so whether it's IT or whether it's we go outside, the most important thing to me in this contract is going to be a real clear assurance, like Jeff said. We want to be able to look over their shoulder enough to hold their feet to the fire that the taxpayer is really getting good value. So nobody up here that I think wants to say, hey, you know, they pick a number out of the air and go and spend that money. But it's hard to do that. It's this bid process. It's going to be hard for us to evaluate whether this. Everybody talks a great game, but I've seen agencies waste an enormous amount of money and get stuck with a product they're stuck with for 5 or 10 years that doesn't work because they only had a certain budget for this thing, and whoever it was didn't deliver. So for me, that's what's going to be most important, is if it's not a database that's really going to work for us, it's a waste of money. And so I don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish on that aspect of it. So I just want to offer that. So that would be my suggestion, but I'm happy, but I could do it this other way if that's what you gentlemen prefer. I'm just glad that most of us are on board for moving forward with the database, and I think still also on board for the legal fees.
Mike.
Let me pop in real quick. The irony isn't missed on me with the study part, and that's funny. That's good. But my answer would be that I'm probably okay with leaving things as they are, as you suggest, because it is kind of logical that way. But I think we needed to have this discussion to get to this point. And so it's been arduous to get to this point, but we're here now, and so that's been good.
Great. Mike.
Well,
I'm sorry, Steve.
Your concern, I think the DMV's project of trying to do the license plate thing a few years ago is a good example of a computer system that never got there. In my own case, I've spent several $100,000 on computer systems in the various businesses, and when Jeff talks about people writing code, that does take the scare pack to me, because I've spent a lot of hours with Unix writers and stuff, and yeah, we come out, if you get a brilliant person, you come out fine, and if you don't get a brilliant person, you don't discover it because you're not as smart as they are, and then they finally walk away. The biggest problem I see with budgeting for a database is we haven't defined really what we need. I mean, I know you've tried, but to have the talented person, if you're going to paint the Sistine Chapel, you've got to find somebody who knows how to do it. And that's been my problem with databases. My prayer would be that we would be able to go to Oracle or someone else who does business databases, and they would have one with a guarantee with it. Elson takes pride in being the second richest guy around. At least for a few days, he was the richest guy around. But business software, there's a lot of people write business software. And custom programs are fine, but they are not without their pitfalls when you do a custom job that's a one-up, and then you got to have the same guy maintain it probably. I would also take you back to the years when Richard Wittenberg first put this concept together, a central services kind of deal. And we could not look up in the night who owned a damn dog. So we get an emergency dog in the middle of the night, we can't, because you can't get into the county database. This is a real problem. And to get hooked up with those guys again gives me the panic. But I don't want to get bogged down on that. I would like to more look to Chairman Mulhart. I really appreciate the outreach that you did to my constituents. Craig has enumerated the people that you visited with, and I appreciate that a lot. And I think at this point, I'm being more generalized and getting hung on any one line item. I think the fact that Chairman Mulhart had a chance to visit with the constituency to see that there was some problems in the neighborhood and to try to develop a vision of where we're going. I don't think we can decide all this today, but I think that we've kind of had an awakening, and if that's the case, then through this awakening, I think there's going to be good. So from that standpoint, the reaction I have received back from my constituency, which you spoke to, is that as an act of faith, we would tend to go along with your efforts, perhaps on the outline that you did of maybe taking this away from being the database and leave it as Supervisor Bennett would suggest, maybe just in a general contingency, which requires our approval to do anything with it. And then we could also, if the need arose that Director Borchard would like to have something looked at specifically, we have our money pre-allocated that we could throw that into legal. And so instead of trying to completely resolve it today, I'm more impressed and pleased with the fact that this has kind of come to a head. I think it kind of did an awakening, and I appreciate, again, Chairman Mulhart, your efforts, and I'm prepared to go ahead and vote for you with the budget in whatever way as an act of faith that we're going to move forward together in a more compassionate manner to our constituents, and that we're going to try to solve problems rather than create them, and that we're going to try to facilitate and implement rather than obstruct and obscure the thing. So from that standpoint, that's, I think, what I bring from the feedback I've received from your efforts, Lynn. I thank you a lot for it.
Okay. I appreciate the comments, and I even got a call today from Ron Calkins. So just to let you know, Neil, I've talked to everybody across the board. So, and as I told Ron today what he called, and I have said to all of you, I'll go anywhere to chat with anybody to explain what I think we're doing and to listen. I'm not going anyplace. I got places to fly if you folks don't want me doing this, so I got things I can do. But if I'm not willing to go out and hear, if we are not willing to go out and hear our constituents, it's hard for us to ask our staff to be willing to go out and reach our constituents. So I want it from top down. So I appreciate your comments, Mike. I believe the database needs to be done. If the way to do it is with Steve's recommendation to put it in the pile of contingency, and no money is spent out of contingency unless it goes up and down the flagpole of the public process, and that gives us monies to do computer if necessary, or legal if necessary, or not to spend it if necessary, because it's in the contingency pile, then I would put it in the contingency pile. I would go and get our work plan done. One of the commitments I did make to constituents is that we at the board have got to be good taskmasters, good facilitators of making sure staff is moving along, so we're not just getting reports and we're just stuck in the mud. Jeff and I have had this conversation, and he's committed to that. I think we're all committed to that. It's a management issue. The board will manage, staff will manage, the constituents will make sure that we manage, and we'll move the ball forward. If it's in the contingency pile, as you recommended, I think that's brilliant, and I'm more than happy to do that. And then when these specific line item expenditures come up, we have another bite at the apple, and we'll review it at that time, and we'll ask the tough questions at that time.
I have one contingency line item to ask for today, permission. It's to hire an outside attorney to review the LAFCO GMA issue. We had to search high and low to find somebody who didn't have a conflict with one of the other water agencies or cities in the GMA. We found a firm called Stoll Reeves out of Sacramento. It came highly recommended by some of the constituency behind me. I asked for it because I don't know water attorneys. I asked water agencies to send me lists. Originally, they sent in a bid. They wanted $325 an hour, about 30 hours, a maximum not to exceed 11,000. Called them up and said, "You better find a government rate." They sent back and said, "Well, we can go 200 with some of our staff, but if I touch it, I'm doing 325. I'd like a maximum of 8,200." So that's where it stands as of right now, which exceeds my $5,000 authority. So if you're interested in hiring Stoll Reeves, it would be our recommendation, and we can start working on that before the next board meeting.
Okay.
The issue is whether or not the GMA needs to go to LAFCO in order to change its boundaries. There's a county council opinion that was issued in 2000 by the county council representing the GMA that says that we should. At that time, it wasn't a boundary issue, it was a funding issue. LAFCO is funded by member agencies, and they wanted to know whether or not the GMA should be funding. The GMA has been paying into LAFCO since. So this would be, in effect, looking at two issues.
Okay, so let's kind of put the whole package together. You've submitted, because we have to approve a budget here.
Yes.
Okay. The budget, go back to your slide of the budget you want us to approve, because I'm hearing...
Can we bring up the Excel spreadsheet?
Well, however, yeah. What I want to make sure is we're all in agreement that...
Oh, we have this version, which was the column that's in your board packet. Oh, thank you. The column that's in your board packet, this was the recommended 722.
Okay. We're saying that the database contract will be moved down to a contingency line.
It is there already.
Okay, that's there already. Again, I apologize for my...
It's this 215 right
Okay.
here.
Okay.
This 10,000 was put there just for the sake of transparency. That's money that we've already spent county staff mapping the thing, analyzing it, current state, future state, trying to create the flow that's needed for the
So
code.
that $215,000 in contingency gives us the ability to hire counsel if necessary, a database project if necessary, or any other contingency by definition. What you're asking to us today is to approve in the budget taking out essentially $8,500 and earmarking it for specifically outside legal counsel today.
And one of the things we would change under consulting contracts, I heard you say we'd reduce that 30,000 by 25. That's where the 25 for the OPUG is.
Okay, so that 30,000 would go down to 5.
And
right?
I think I can do that right now if you like.
That's a good database.
Thank Bill Gates.
It only took us 12 years to do that. All right, so PV has just been taken off the table. Thank you, John. I hope you appreciate that. Rob's back there just laughing away. I can see it. You notice Rob has yet to come up and say, no, give them their $25,000. I haven't heard from Rob at all, but maybe before we're done. I'll catch you. All right, so we've changed the PV, the Oxnard group down to 5. That pulls the budget down by 25,000 is all that we're doing. And your question, the last question you gave us was, where would you want to put this $8,500 legal?
It would come out of there.
It would come out of there.
Right.
So we would agree as part of the budgeting, I give you the authority to spend the $8,500 and move forward on asking this legal question. Yeah, geez. Okay, is that a fair summation of what you're asking?
Yes.
Members, is that a fair summation of the budget as submitted by staff after this long and lengthy discussion? And so let me go across. Steve, is this what you envisioned? Yes. Charlotte?
I can go along with that.
Mike? Dave?
With the stipulation that questions of legal uses of the contingency and uses of the database contingency will be brought to us first.
Okay, all right.
And that database thing will be bid out.
Yeah, the word contingency is nebulous. We haven't assigned it anything, so for you to spend the money, it has to come before us, and we'll go through that process, okay? So with those changes, that is staff's recommendation for a budget, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. To the folks in the audience. Mike. Now we get the bean counter Mike coming forward.
No bean counting here. I'm just saying, from United's standpoint, we support this. We think this is what I was mentioning when I first got up here is let's get the organization so it works efficiently. I think to try to nickel and dime the database money, I've been through a database changeover. Let me tell you, you have no idea. At United, we are so unique. We have to go to a special company, and we pay a certain amount of money every month because they have to change and tweak things so that it works. You're the same way. You're very unique. So I think you're very wise not to try to mess with that number, because if Jeff put in 125, it's likely to come in more. It depends on who you get. I forgot who said it. It depends on how smart the person is that you get, and that's really true. The only, and we support the budget as being recommended now. The one thing I would add is there's still the word out there on the penalty monies that they can't be used to grant for projects, or possibly used if there's any, because of the enabling ordinance. I would just ask that be looked into, so as it doesn't change the budget, but eventually we get some opinion that if there's money available, can somebody come back and ask and use it outside the GMA's operation?
I've heard that message, and when it gets close to a point where we're having to look at making a grant, we'll add that to the agenda.
Or you have the money available. Right now, you got projects you got to take care of first. But I'd like it just to get looked at so people know that in time, that could be a place to look for some grant funding.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman?
You okay? Okay. Yes, sir.
Just for strictly mechanical, not policy purposes, effectively what you have done is remove $25,000 from the total costs, but you're also committing $8,500, so that needs to go someplace now. And I would suggest you either increment the legal fee by that $8,500, since you're earmarking for that purpose within the cost, or place the difference between the $2,500 and the $8,500 to contingency, thereby increasing contingency.
Okay, what do you folks want to do?
Could I suggest we spend the 85 out of the 40 we've already got on the line item? And then if it comes true that we're going to need more than the 40 we've budgeted, then we'll get it out of contingency.
Okay, all right. Everybody okay with that as an answer, or where do you, Steve?
I'm okay with that as an answer if staff believes that works for them in terms of procedure, because I have a procedural question.
That will work. What it does, though, is that's our estimate for county council charges. So if county council gets close to hitting it, we'll be coming back.
You ought to do it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we ought to just maybe add it, if that's already what we think we're going to spend. Why, I mean, we're going to have to come through with a budget change at a later date, so it just seems to me if we know we're going to spend one thing and then 8,500 more, why not just do it now?
So I guess my point would be take $8,500 out of the $25,000 that we cut out, move it to the legal pile.
Leave the contingency at 215.
Leave the contingent at 215. Right. Make the legal file
48.5.
48.5, and the rest of the money disappears.
Right.
I would just do that. If you're going to spend the money, and that $40,000 is earmarked for county council. So.
I just want to ask a question both of the board members and of staff here, because I know we want to get moving on the database. We made a statement here. We said we don't want any money spent on the database until it comes back to us, which I support. But to the extent that any small sums need to be spent to get the bids process to us. That's not what we're talking about. Staff, can you get the bid process to us without needing to come back for contingency? That's what I want.
I think so. What this question is how detailed we're going to have the map. I'll be meeting with IT services, and what they have prepared should tell us. So, and I think I'm authorized to spend up to $5,000 while we're waiting. I believe that's the
So
case.
if everybody's comfortable with that, I just don't want Jeff to say, I can't do anything for another month because the board doesn't meet and I need to spend $2,000 to.
For my part, Mr. Pratt, I would like to just to see some printed documentation of what we're anticipating doing. I've been down this road too many times, and oh, by the way, the next update will fix the problem, and $30,000, the problem was worse, and those kind of things. And so this is a long slope downward in the computer world.
We can give a presentation to the board at the September meeting if you like.
Okay. And if I could, I just want to get this on the radar screen early. I want to both make sure we get a good product at the end. I also want to get a product that we have the minimum amount of need to go to somebody every time we want to make a little change. That's the stuff that kills you. And there's a tendency for these people to link you to them for life.
They write things interesting and unique in their own and it's like the librarian who only knew where the dictionary was because it was under Q.
Before we leave this, one suggestion is that the $25,000 be taken out of the budget. We expend the 85 out of the legal pile and then deal with it later if we have to. Charlotte made the suggestion. We put the 85 into the legal budget, and whatever difference is left over, that disappears. There's two different issues here, and so before we leave that,
You want us to know what to do?
let me say it this way. The message I got when I went to the marketplace is we have a big budget and they're concerned. So I want to make sure that I'm carrying the message that I heard loud and clear from a variety of people that are, I'm not saying, I think Mike said it right. If we hadn't reached out to folks and tried to create a new vision or a redefined vision and had heard from all of us our emphasis on having a efficient, effective, plug the holes, but let's not create a dynasty, I think we would have a huge fight on our hands where people are saying, you know what, the budget is so far out of whack. So I'm seeing and feeling a huge movement of folks that are still leery. The proof is in our actions, and I don't want to kill that momentum by this last little item here, and so I'm raising the question to make sure I can go either way. But I'm in effect pointing to Craig because his organization and PV's organization are some of the folks that had major concerns, and as long as I'm getting buy-in, that's what I want to make sure I have.
Let me just make one point. I think that in trying to respond to constituents or people who are concerned about the budget, I think we need to make sure that we don't go the other way and end up with something that's misleading.
Yep, I agree.
I think that if we say at the very beginning we think it's going to cost us somewhere around $40,000 for county council, and if we are saying, Jeff, go ahead and sign an agreement for $8,500 with this other law firm from Sacramento for this specific two purposes or whatever it is, then I think being honest, we'd be putting it all together under legal fees or else adding to contracts an $8,500 thing and telling the people we think we're going to spend $48,500 on legal fees. If we don't, if we take $8,500 out of county council in essence and say we're going to leave it down here in contingency, knowing full well we're going to pull it out at a later date, I think that's really misleading.
Okay, that's why I wanted to have this discussion. Dave.
My head's beginning to swim. No, I'm fine with what's been suggested.
Move it up to make it 48.5. Okay. So
We still are decreasing the budget.
yes.
So it's just whether we're decreasing by 2,500 or whether we're decreasing it
25,000.
I mean 25,000 or whether we're decreasing by 16,000.
Okay.
And I think it bears merit to repeat that we aren't building an agency, we aren't building an empire. We're all clearly with that understanding that we have things to fix. That's why we've allocated the money, with the goal that we're going to get back to the lean and mean and trying to do this efficiently.
Yep, okay. All right, so the budget as, the 48.5 in legal, the contingency, the PV charges down to 5, that is your submitted budget. That's what we heard. Rob has not come up, so I'm going to ask for somebody to make a motion so I can get this done. It's
Okay,
been a
you
long day.
stated it and also move.
All right, I have a motion
Second.
and a second. Miranda, can we have any other discussion? Can we have a roll call, please?
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchert?
Yes.
Okay.
Good discussion.
Very good discussion, and it's part of our process. There's no other items on the agenda except for a closed session item, all right?
That's correct.
And so we will adjourn to closed session. Al, will we reform in public session for no action, or tell the folks what we're going to do?
The board will reconvene in open session, but no announcement of closed session is anticipated.
Okay, all right. And finally, okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.